were on a wire. They went right through the rat's neck like this.
Oh.
And they said it killed the critter instantly. It didn't live about 45 minutes. If we were talking about those, I could produce the records of that company and tell you that exactly where every component came from, because all the business records survive. There are no business records for Esther Howland. There are no business records for Jotham Taft. And what you saw in the example where there's that note about F.W. Woolworths, that's the extent of what survives for Whitney Company records. When the Whitney Company closes, the local newspaper talks about it as the end of Worcester's premier role in the Valentine industry. They give lots of statistics about how many Valentines were made. But we don't know where they came from. We know the brothers' route was to New York City and to Philadelphia, and we know that those places would have been importing all sorts of fancy papers. And we know that the lace papers are coming from England. We know there's some limited production in New York and maybe some in Philadelphia, but where they really came from, nobody knows. And it's like those boxes, that box from 1925 that you saw where there could be a miscellany of lace papers in there. How were they buying them? Were they buying 500, have you ever bought those paper doilies? We use them with kids in the classroom thing, so I know about lace doilies. Now how hard they are to get apart.
Yes.
So were they buying a stack of those and had 100 of them, or were they like in the other boxes having 5 of this and 4 of that and 3 of this? We don't really know because the records don't survive. What we do know is about assembling the boxes in the 1920s, because until about 20 years ago you could go to a senior citizen group and talk to them, and especially the women there would say, oh, I would go to the Whitney factory after school when I was in high school and I would assemble those boxes as piecework. Then just, get pennies a day probably for doing this. And you quiz them about, well, what were the instructions? Just fill the bag with 35 pieces of this and 10 pieces of that, just like it said on the sheet. And she would leave, one of the women particularly said, we would be absolutely mischievous. In some of the boxes we would put 35 of the same piece of lace, and other ones that we would put no two that were alike. It would just depend on how bored we are. So they kept alive that tradition, that Howland tradition. Imagine sitting in that hot attic in a city filled with all those factories. When you opened the window you probably coughed your brains out. It was hot, and you had your glue pot, and you did one thing all day long. And you're probably thinking, here's one for that one, and here's one for that one, and you were thinking, oh well, I'm bored, I'm not putting anything more in this one's for my mother-in-law. Kind of approach. So the answer is we just don't know, and wish that we did, but we're pretty convinced at this point that any business records that survive for these people are going to be fragmentary. If you want to know about rat traps, I could tell you down to the penny what the screws and those things cost. And if only we could find some Valentine records. The last of the siblings of the George Whitney who closed the factory died about 10 years ago. And she gave us what limited stuff survived in the family. But it was like any other business when it closed. They were out of the Valentine business. They didn't keep the records. They just let them go. These were things that just happened to wander home with them. Sir.
Bill, February 14th.
Yes.
Did she select this month and this day, or was it?
It was long selected before that. It was just like Christmas. Someone in the 16th century had decided Valentine's Day was the 14th of February. It's not an American holiday. It's a European holiday. It's just like Christmas. Even the Pope would agree that Jesus probably wasn't born on the 25th of December, but it's the best date they could find. And we know that Christmas was really meant to replace a Roman holiday, which was really about debauchery. And so what the deal was it because it was February and people were snowed in and they were bored, they needed a holiday? I don't think anyone really has been able to determine the roots of Valentine's Day.
There's some little YouTubes on here that see about Valentine's Day.
Oh, you can find lots of wonderful things on the internet. You can find lots of stuff about Valentine makers, and most of the Valentine history is based on Ruth Webb Lee's History of American Valentines. What her sources were, we don't really know. We've pieced together what we were able to piece together at the museum, and we have debunked some of what she said. The Taft family, the last of the Taft family, Norman Taft, who was well, a character at best who lived in Grafton. He was a bit of a sot by his own description, that if he hadn't had a drink by 11, he was no good, he'd say. And he would come in and say, no, my grandfather was making the Valentines before that blankety blank woman. And it's that tradition that has probably informed people like Ruth Webb Lee through the years. It's not a lot. The Tafts in Grafton saying, well, we were doing it long before she was. There's little documentary evidence of any of this other than that one ad from 1852, her father's ad from 1850, which does not state that they're his daughter's Valentines, and then a couple of newspaper articles. It's a guess. So when you open that box of Valentines at home, and unless it says Nevco, like that wonderful box of them that I'm keeping my eye on today, they're in the corner right there. She has her hand on them. They're some of the finest Nevcos I've seen, I have to admit. Unless it has one of those on it, you just don't know where it comes from. It could be English. It could be made in New York City. It could be made in Hoboken. It could have been made in Freeport, Maine by someone who was doing the same thing, who just has escaped history's radar. And maybe didn't become the big-time entrepreneur in the what I like to think was the Worcester tradition because of the competition within the community of keep going, making it better, doing it better. Might have been somebody who made Valentines for 3 years and said, I'm out of here. You know? We don't really know. So, don't second guess. Don't believe they're Howland, Whitney, or Taft unless they're marked. And if they are marked, you know where I am. Yes?
I've noticed that Esther Howland's designs and values, she uses a lot of embossing.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you have any collections of her templates. And,
If
I
only.
I would think that, you know, I've been doing a lot of embossing, stylus and all that.
Yeah.
Everything's handmade, so.
We think that a lot of the embossed paper she was buying as raw materials.
So
Already embossed, pre-embossed, because her brother was on the road. The only equipment, the only materials, or the only factory implements that survive are a set of the they're like cookie cutters. They're dies for cutting Valentines, and there are 5 of them. They're consecutive sizes, is what I'm trying to say. And those are from the Whitney Company. Those were bought during the auction in 1942 by one of their employees, and they are now at the museum. And there probably would have been a lot of those things, but Esther Howland, how much she was actually doing versus buying, we don't know. Those scraps, you know, you can go to a store today, you can buy all those, what are called scraps, which in my youth would have been called decals. That was a long time ago. And they would have had glue on them then. Who knows? We just don't know. We don't know where the materials were coming from. We don't know who worked for her. We know some of the people who work for the Whitney Company because you can do an analysis of the 1920, 1910 census. If you're really patient, you can put on the manuscript reels and it'll say, worked at the Valentine Company. The consistent workers tended to be the printers and the watchmen, night watchmen. You'll get a young woman who's 19 or 20 who works there for 1 year and then disappears from the census. You find a marriage record for her and she's living in a completely different town. So there's some transient art skills. There has to be someone who was there making those Campbell Soup type kids that you see on the postcards especially. It has to be someone's style who is either establishing the template or doing it for long term, and that person has not been identified. We asked a lot of the older people who were going there to assemble the boxes, and they just didn't know the factory people. They were, you know, all due respect, they were, to the current audience, they were kids who were going in from school and they were making money filling boxes and they weren't interacting with the people in management. The last of the Whitney Company people was David Whitney. You might recognize that name, who was a friend of Andy Warhol's and a big-time collector. David Whitney, partner of Philip Johnson, who just died a year or so ago. This was his grandfather. So it's an artsy tradition that continues, and talking to David years ago, he's like, oh yeah, I heard something about that, but I don't know anything about it. It's a tradition that just faded.
Are they related to the Whitney Museum?
No, I wish, because I would have the Whitney Valentine wing at that burned down visitor center that didn't work, and they were 2 16-year-olds, and don't get me on that subject, I am not pleasant on that subject. We were going to build a $35 million museum and visitor center, and 2 16-year-old kids torched the building. Yeah, so. But, we would have the Whitney Gallery there if there were No, they're not part of that family at all. So again, thank you, and there are some things about the museum out there if you want to come visit us. If you're in the neighborhood, we'd love to see you, or you can go online. Our Valentine, simple Valentine history is actually online. It's on our website right now, and there's a bunch of other stuff there, so we welcome you to come visit. And the next time you go to the supermarket, you buy shredded wheat, and it says Niagara Falls in the corner. And you know, the clerk is standing there clicking the things through, talking to the other clerk about what they were doing the night before, and you're thinking, oh, just get me out of here. Just say, you know, that's not correct. That's actually the Worcester original. I've done that. They think you're due to flip any second, so they quickly get you out of there. I've used that technique many times. It's like Mr. Perky and his sluggish body parts. It gets things moving. Thank you
so much. If we had known about the shredded wheat, we could have had chocolate dipped shredded wheat instead of, you know, these silly cookies. So next time, Bill, we'll have you up.
Yeah, and we could talk about body chemistry and all that.
Worcester Historical Society Museum fly.